The storm howled outside our tent in the Colorado Rockies, but nothing prepared me for Maxwell's trembling voice cutting through the darkness. "Nolan, I'm not straight. I never was," he confessed, his fingers brushing mine, shattering the fragile wall we'd built around our friendship. Rain lashed the nylon walls like angry fists, and the flashlight between us flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to mock every casual laugh we'd shared back in our cramped dorm room at the University of Colorado. I sat frozen on my sleeping bag, heart hammering louder than the thunder rolling down the peaks. Maxwell, the guy who dated 3 girls in the last semester alone, the athlete who high-fived every frat brother on campus, now stared at me with eyes I'd never seen so raw. We'd come here 2 days ago to escape finals week stress. Just 2 roommates blowing off steam with cheap beer and trail mix. Or so I thought. The trip had started ordinary enough. Maxwell had burst into our apartment the Friday before, backpack already slung over one shoulder, grinning that easy smile that always made my stomach twist in ways I buried deep. "Dude, let's ditch Boulder for the weekend. Rockies, real camping, no Wi-Fi, no drama." I'd agreed too fast, telling myself it was just friendship. The same lie I'd repeated since freshman year when he'd moved in and turned my quiet life upside down. We drove his old Jeep up the winding roads to Rocky Mountain National Park, windows down, classic rock blaring, talking about everything except what mattered. He complained about his latest ex, some sorority girl who wanted more commitment than he could give. I nodded along, swallowing the truth that I'd been carrying for months. The secret that made every shared pizza night feel like walking a tightrope. By the time we pitched the tent at a secluded spot near Bear Lake, the sun was dipping behind the jagged peaks, painting the sky in oranges and purples that felt almost too beautiful for the mess inside me. Maxwell handled the fire like he'd been born in the woods, stacking logs with that effortless confidence while I unpacked the cooler. "This is what I needed," he said, stretching out his long legs by the flames, the light catching the blonde stubble on his jaw. No parents breathing down my neck. No teammates expecting me to be the perfect golden boy. I laughed, poking at the coals with a stick, but my mind raced. His parents back in Denver were the classic conservative type, church every Sunday, football on Saturdays, the kind who posted proud photos of him with girlfriends on Facebook. Mine weren't much better, though they'd at least stopped asking when I'd bring a girl home after I dodged the question one too many times. We roasted hot dogs and talked about classes, about the upcoming soccer season where Maxwell was captain, about how the city lights felt suffocating sometimes. The conversation flowed easy, like always, but there was an undercurrent tonight, something in the way he kept glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. The first raindrops hit just as we crawled into the tent, zipping the flap against the sudden downpour. Inside, the space felt smaller than usual, our sleeping bags side by side, the scent of pine and wet earth mixing with his familiar cologne. We lay there listening to the storm, trading stories from childhood, mine about growing up in a small suburb outside Chicago, always the quiet kid sketching in notebooks while others played sports, his about Denver Little League glory and the pressure to be the star son. Then the mood shifted. Maxwell rolled onto his side, propping his head on one elbow, the flashlight beam catching the uncertainty in his blue eyes. "Nolan, you've always been straight with me, right? Like, no judgment." I nodded, throat tight, wondering where this was going. He hesitated, then spilled it. The girls never felt right, the dates always ended with him pulling away. The emptiness he couldn't name until lately, until moments like this when we were alone and the world felt far away. My mind spun, every suppressed feeling I'd locked away threatening to break free. I wanted to tell him I'd felt it too. The pull, the quiet longing that made me stay up nights replaying our conversations. But the words stuck. Instead, I listened as he talked about the confusion, the fear of what it meant for his life, his team, his family. The rain intensified, mirroring the chaos inside the tent, and for the first time, the wall between us cracked just a little. We didn't sleep much that night. Hours blurred into deep talks about identity and fear, about the masks we wore on campus to fit in. Maxwell's voice grew softer, more vulnerable, admitting he'd watched me more than he should. Noticed the way I cared without asking for anything back. I shared fragments of my own story, the high school crush I'd hidden, the college years of silent wondering. By the time the storm eased to a drizzle, something had shifted between us, an understanding that went beyond words. Yet as dawn crept in through the tent mesh, painting the walls in soft gray, I wondered if this was the start of something real or just a momentary crack in the facade we'd both maintained. The mountains outside stood silent witnesses, and I knew nothing would ever feel the same again. Morning light filtered through the trees as we broke camp, the air crisp and clean after the storm, but the tension from last night lingered like mist on the lake. Maxwell moved slower than usual, folding the tent with deliberate care, avoiding my eyes at first, then stealing glances that made my pulse race. "We good?" he asked finally, voice rough from lack of sleep, as we loaded the Jeep. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, man. Better than good." But inside, my thoughts churned. What did his confession mean for us? Was it a one-time vulnerability or the beginning of something that could upend both our lives? We drove back toward Boulder in comfortable silence broken only by the radio, stopping once at a roadside diner for coffee and eggs. Over the table, Maxwell opened up more, talking about how the pressure from his dad to follow in the family business after graduation felt like a noose. "He'd lose it if he knew," he muttered, staring into his mug. I wanted to reach across and reassure him, but I held back, the habit of years too strong. Back on campus, the routine tried to reclaim us. Classes resumed, soccer practice for Maxwell, my art studio hours where I sketched furiously, trying to capture the lines of his face without admitting why. Our apartment felt different now, charged with unspoken possibilities. Nights we'd watch movies on the couch, closer than before, shoulders brushing, neither of us pulling away. One evening after a long day, Maxwell came home from practice, hair damp from the shower, and dropped onto the couch beside me. That night in the tent, it wasn't just the storm talking. I've been thinking about it nonstop. His admission hung in the air, heavy and honest. I turned to him, heart in my throat, and for the first time said the words I'd practiced in my head. "Me too. But what now? Your life, your family, the team." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration etching his features. "I don't know. Part of me wants to figure it out with you, Nolan. The other part is terrified of what it costs." The weeks that followed tested us in quiet ways. A teammate invited Maxwell to a party with girls from another dorm, and he went, but texted me halfway through saying it felt wrong. I waited up, and when he returned, we talked until sunrise about the double life he was living. My own internal storm raged too. I dated briefly in high school, a secret relationship that ended in heartbreak when the guy chose the closet over me. Telling Maxwell about it opened old wounds, but his listening, really hearing me, built something deeper than friendship. We started small experiments in trust, sharing playlists that mirrored our moods, cooking dinners together where conversations flowed into dreams for the future. Yet society pressed in. On campus, whispers about bros being too close floated in the locker room, and Maxwell's coach pulled him aside once about focus. At home, his parents called weekly, asking about girlfriends, and each lie chipped away at him. One weekend we escaped again, this time to a quieter trail in the foothills. Hiking under the aspens, Maxwell stopped at an overlook. The city sprawled below like a reminder of the world waiting. "I hate pretending," he said, voice steady despite the wind. "With you, I feel like I can breathe." We sat on a fallen log, knees touching, and I shared my fear of losing our friendship if things went wrong. He took my hand then, a simple gesture that felt monumental, promising we'd face whatever came together. But doubt lingered. His family history, strict and traditional, loomed like the mountains we'd left behind. Mine was distant but judgmental in its silence. Friends like our neighbor Jake, the outgoing business major, started noticing the change in our dynamic, asking pointed questions that made us careful. The emotional weight built slowly, each conversation peeling back layers, forcing us to confront who we were beneath the labels. By the end of that hike, as the sun set, I realized this wasn't just a phase. It was the start of a journey neither of us had mapped, full of risks but laced with a hope I hadn't felt in years. Returning to daily life, the pull grew stronger. Late-night talks turned into shared silences that said more than words. Maxwell began questioning his past relationships openly with me, admitting the disconnect he'd always felt but ignored. I opened up about my art, how drawing him in secret had been my outlet. The bond deepened, but so did the internal conflict. Maxwell worried about losing his spot on the team if rumors spread. I feared the isolation that came with being out in a world that still judged. Yet in those moments, side by side, we found pieces of ourselves we'd hidden too long. The camping night had cracked the door, and now we stood at the threshold, deciding whether to step through. The misunderstanding hit like a blindside tackle during a home game. Jake, our nosy neighbor, cornered Maxwell after practice, joking about how we spent too much time together these days. Maxwell laughed it off, but the seed planted doubt. That night in the apartment, tension crackled as he paced the living room. What if he knows? What if everyone does? His voice cracked, the confident athlete facade slipping. I tried to calm him, but my own fears mirrored his, flashbacks to high school where a similar rumor had cost me a friend. We argued for the first time, words sharp with frustration, each accusing the other of not understanding the stakes. Maxwell stormed out, leaving me alone with the echo of our raised voices. Hours later he returned, rain-soaked again like that first night, eyes red. "I can't lose you over this," he said, pulling me into a hug that lingered, his head resting on my shoulder. The embrace shifted everything, a silent acknowledgement that pretending was no longer an option. From there, the emotional tide turned. We decided to test the waters privately, small steps like skipping parties to stay in and talk, or driving to quiet spots outside town where we could be ourselves. One afternoon in the foothills, Maxwell opened up about his family dinner the previous weekend, how his dad's casual questions about dating girls had felt like knives. "I almost told him," he admitted, voice low as we sat on a boulder overlooking the plains. But the fear stopped me. I shared my own family story, the Thanksgiving where I dodged relatives' matchmaking, the quiet disappointment in their eyes. Our vulnerabilities wove tighter, creating a space where honesty felt safe. Yet external pressures mounted. A teammate mentioned hearing rumors about Maxwell's close friendship, and the coach suggested more focus on the field. Maxwell came home that day deflated, questioning if soccer was worth the mask. The turning point came during a late-night drive back from a game in Denver. Stopped at a pullout under the stars, Maxwell turned to me. "That camping trip woke me up, Nolan. You're not just my roommate. You're the one who sees me." His words hung, raw and real, and in the dim dashboard light, we shared our first tentative kiss, soft and full of years of unspoken longing. No rush, just the weight of realization lifting. Back home, the days blurred into a delicate balance. We navigated campus life carefully, but at night the apartment became our sanctuary. Conversations deepened into plans for after graduation, dreams of a life where we didn't hide. But betrayal loomed. Jake, fishing for gossip during a casual beer night, pieced things together and confronted me privately. "You too? For real?" His tone held surprise, not malice, but the leak risked everything. Maxwell's reaction was immediate panic mixed with resolve. "We can't let this define us," he said one evening, pacing again but with new determination. We faced the misunderstanding head-on, sitting down with Jake to explain, turning potential disaster into reluctant support. The experience taught us the power of choice, how actions in moments of crisis shaped consequences. Internally, Maxwell grappled with his identity, journaling late nights while I sketched the emotions I saw in him. Family calls grew strained as holidays approached, his mother's subtle hints about settling down adding layers of guilt. My own parents sensed the change in my voice during calls, probing gently but pulling back when I deflected. The growth was gradual, each hurdle revealing strength we didn't know we had. The camping night had been the spark, but these weeks forged it into something enduring, a partnership built on mutual understanding and the courage to keep choosing each other despite the world's pull. As fall leaves turned gold on campus, we stole moments of peace, hiking shorter trails where the world felt smaller. Maxwell's smiles came easier, his touches more natural when alone. Yet the internal storms weren't over. He confessed one night the fear of disappointing his dad, the man who'd coached his first soccer game. I held him through it, offering the acceptance he'd craved. Our bond strengthened through these fires, turning roommates into something profound. The path ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time, facing it together felt possible. Thanksgiving break arrived like a storm cloud, pulling Maxwell back to Denver while I stayed in Boulder to work on a portfolio project. The separation tested us harder than expected. Phone calls stretched late, his voice laced with exhaustion from family dinners where questions about his future wife never stopped. "I almost said something at the table," he admitted during one call, the line crackling with distance. "But Mom looked so happy talking about grandkids." My heart ached for him, mirroring my own quiet dinners with distant relatives who assumed I was the perpetual bachelor. When he returned, the apartment felt like home again, but the weight he'd carried showed in tired eyes. We spent the evening unpacking not just bags but the emotional baggage, his stories of biting his tongue around cousins highlighting the societal cage closing in. The real confrontation came weeks later at a holiday party thrown by the soccer team. Maxwell had invited me as his roommate, but the air thickened when an old high school friend of his showed up, the type who thrived on old stories. Drinks flowed, laughter echoed, but when the conversation turned to past girlfriends, Maxwell froze. I watched from across the room as he deflected, the lie tasting bitter. Later, in the car home, he broke down. "I can't keep doing this, Nolan. It's eating me alive." That night we talked through the pain, mapping out a plan to come out slowly, starting with close friends. But fate intervened. Jake, meaning well but clumsy, let slip details in a group chat, and by morning the team knew fragments. Maxwell's phone buzzed nonstop with messages, some supportive, others questioning. The betrayal stung, not from malice but from the ripple effect of one loose word. We faced it head-on, Maxwell calling a team meeting where he stood tall, voice steady despite shaking hands. "This is who I am," he said simply, glancing at me for strength. The reactions varied, some teammates nodding in quiet respect, others pulling away with awkward excuses. The coach pulled him aside later, emphasizing focus but offering guarded support. Internally, the crisis forced Maxwell to confront his deepest fear, the loss of the identity he'd built as the straight-star athlete. I stood by him through sleepless nights, reminding him of the man I'd seen in the tent that stormy night, vulnerable yet unbreakable. My own growth paralleled his, learning to advocate not just for him but for us, pushing past my tendency to hide in art studios. Family pressure peaked during winter break when Maxwell's parents visited Boulder unexpectedly. Dinner at a local spot turned tense as his dad probed about settling down. Maxwell glanced at me across the table, and in a moment of quiet courage, he redirected the conversation without full revelation, but the seed was planted. Back home, we processed the near miss, the sacrifice of truth for timing weighing heavy. Misunderstandings with extended family followed, calls filled with subtle disapproval that chipped at his resolve. Yet each challenge built resilience. We volunteered at a local LGBTQ center one weekend, anonymous at first, then finding community that mirrored our struggles. The experience awakened something in both of us, a sense of belonging beyond the closet. Through it all, our connection deepened into quiet rituals, morning coffee talks, evening walks where hands brushed freely in the dark. The emotional journey from that camping confession had evolved into shared purpose, each of us sacrificing pieces of the old self for a truer version. Society's gaze remained harsh, but our choices, deliberate and mutual, turned pressure into power. As spring semester loomed, we stood stronger, the misunderstandings and betrayals behind us forging a foundation no storm could easily shake. Spring brought new trials as graduation neared, the future looming like the Rockies on the horizon. Maxwell's soccer season ended with a championship game where he played his heart out, but post-game celebrations turned awkward when teammates toasted the old Maxwell. He pulled me aside that night, the stadium lights fading, and whispered, "I want them to know the real me before we leave." The decision marked a pivotal step, but it invited backlash. One teammate, a close buddy from freshman year, reacted with confusion bordering on anger, accusing Maxwell of changing the team dynamic. The confrontation in the locker room left scars, words like disappointment echoing long after. Maxwell came home deflated, questioning if the truth was worth the isolation. But I reminded him of our tent promise, the night that taught us hiding hurt more. My family entered the picture when they flew in for a campus visit. Over lunch, the conversation veered toward my single status, and in a surge of courage mirroring Maxwell's, I introduced him not just as roommate but as the person who mattered most. The silence that followed stung. My dad's furrowed brow and mom's careful questions revealing layers of prejudice I'd feared. We drove them to the airport in heavy quiet, the drive home filled with processing the hurt. "They'll come around," Maxwell said, squeezing my hand, but the sacrifice of their approval weighed on me. The experience bonded us further, turning individual family struggles into shared resilience. A larger betrayal struck when an anonymous post on the campus forum outed us with details twisted from Jake's earlier slip. Comments flooded in, some cruel, others curious, forcing us into the spotlight neither wanted. Maxwell's parents called immediately, the conversation explosive with denial and demands to fix it. He hung up shaking, the emotional toll evident in sleepless nights where he paced, weighing the cost to his future job prospects in Denver. I held space for his anger, my own internal crisis surfacing as I doubted if our path invited too much pain. Yet in those dark hours we chose each other again, deciding to respond publicly with a simple joint statement on social media, owning our story without apology. The support that trickled in from unexpected corners, professors, distant friends, ignited hope. The growth accelerated as we navigated post-graduation plans. Maxwell landed an internship in Boulder, choosing proximity over Denver's family pull, a sacrifice that spoke volumes. I secured a gallery assistant role, my art now infused with the colors of our journey. Together we attended counseling sessions on campus, unpacking the identity crises and societal scars. Misunderstandings with old friends surfaced, one accusing us of faking it for attention, but each resolved through honest talks that strengthened our communication. The high point came during a weekend return to the same Rockies campsite, tent pitched under clearer skies. Around the fire, we reflected on the stormy night that started it all, laughing through tears at how far we'd come. Maxwell's hand in mine felt natural now, the pretense gone. Yet the climax built as his family planned an intervention-style visit. The dinner confrontation tested every boundary, voices raised over values and choices, but Maxwell stood firm, articulating the awakening that began in that tent. I supported silently, my presence a quiet anchor. The evening ended in uneasy truce, not acceptance but a crack in the wall. Returning home, the exhaustion mixed with triumph, proving our decisions carried consequences but also freedom. The journey from roommates to partners had demanded everything, internal wars won through vulnerability and action. Graduation day dawned bright over Boulder, caps and gowns fluttering as we crossed the stage side by side, families watching from the stands. Maxwell's parents sat stiffly, their smiles polite but strained after months of tentative calls. Mine attended virtually, still processing but sending proud messages. The ceremony felt like closure to one chapter and the opening of another, our hands brushing during the procession a private victory. Post-ceremony, amid hugs and photos, we stole a moment alone under the elm trees, the weight of 4 years lifting. "We made it," Maxwell said, eyes shining with the same vulnerability from that rainy tent. The road ahead in our shared apartment turned home base for careers, and continued growth held promise. But echoes of past conflicts lingered. Months later, settled into routines, the final test arrived when Maxwell's dad visited unannounced, demanding a real talk. The living room conversation stretched hours, accusations meeting calm explanations, Maxwell laying bare the internal struggle and the choices that led here. I sat beside him, offering facts over emotion, highlighting how love had strengthened rather than weakened him. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, his dad admitting fear of the unknown, a human crack in the armor. Not full embrace, but a step toward understanding that felt monumental. My family followed suit with a video call, questions softer now, the distance bridged by time and our quiet persistence. Friends who'd pulled away returned with apologies, the circle widening through earned trust. Our life together bloomed in small ways, weekend hikes echoing the first trip, conversations now laced with future plans like adopting a dog or traveling. The emotional maturity we'd gained turned obstacles into lessons, each sacrifice revealing deeper strength. Maxwell thrived at his firm, out to colleagues on his terms, while my art exhibitions featured pieces inspired by our story, subtle yet powerful. Society's prejudices surfaced occasionally, a side glance here or a comment there, but we faced them united. The camping night's lesson etched deep. Authenticity demanded courage but delivered peace. Looking back at the stormy tent where it all began, the journey proved transformative. From denial and fear to open hearts and shared dreams, Nolan and Maxwell had chosen growth over comfort. Yet one question remains for anyone walking a similar path. Was embracing the truth that night the right choice? Or should they have kept pretending to spare themselves the world's judgment?